Hi, and welcome to the August Tips and Tricks webinar on reporting. We'll begin momentarily after a few housekeeping notes and some quick introductions. I'm Marissa Love. I'm in the customer marketing team, and our host today is Kyle Butler, and moderating the Q&A will be Sandra Elliott, our Director of Education. In terms of housekeeping, just wanted to let everyone know we are recording the webinar. We'll be posting it, but we'll remove the Q&A from any web postings. We'll also email you the slide, the recording, and documentation after the webinar. If you're having trouble viewing the screen or hearing, check your computer's audio and visual settings or send us a chat. We will be taking questions throughout this, so feel free to use chat to send your questions. And if we don't get to your question, we'll send a follow-up email after. Also wanted to point out there is a handout available that you guys can download at your leisure. Otherwise, we'll send that to you as well. Next slide. Wanted to give you guys just a quick insight into what our Tips and Tricks webinar series is all about. We try to do this every month, and we're covering important information on how you can use Sensitive Data Manager and other tools. Most importantly, we'd like your input. We want to hear from you and see what you'd like to learn more about. Lastly, I want to introduce our speaker, Kyle Butler, professional services engineer and tech junkie. Side note, he's also a cat lover and guitar player. He's a former success manager, so he brings a wealth of experience on our tool set here. And he's the editor of Spirion's Privacy Please Flipboard magazine. Kyle?
All right, thank you so much, Marissa. I appreciate it. And as Marissa mentioned, there is a handout in the slide or in the meeting, so please feel free to follow along and grab that from the meeting, or send either Marissa or Sandra a message if you're having trouble accessing that, and they should be able to help you out. So we're going to kind of dive into this. What we're going to be covering on this webinar is reporting, and so I'm going to bring you through a quick slide deck, and I promise it won't be death by PowerPoint, but we're going to talk about prerequisites, things that you're going to need in order to do the report that you're going to see today. We're going to talk briefly about why reporting is so important, and then it's going to be mostly focused around a demonstration, a live demonstration on how to run this report and how to use it to create actionable intelligence. So starting off with the prereqs, what I recommend is that you have a 64-bit version of Microsoft Excel. Any version should be fine, but you know, most of you should probably be in the cloud, so you know, I just recommend getting a 64-bit version. It's important that it's 64-bit because if you're using a 32-bit version, it's got constraints around only being able to utilize 2 gigs of RAM, and the data set that you're going to be looking at is generally going to be using all of that. So that's why 64-bit's important. The other things that you're going to need in order to run this report are the service account information that's used to do the authentication between the IAS server and the SQL server. So it's located in the console administration tool. I'll walk you through that. The other thing that you might need is RDP access to the Spirion IAS server. So for majority of implementations, that should be no trouble, but if that is something that you would need, just know that that's something you might have to make a request for from your security group. So SSMS, everything I show you today can be run through SQL Server Management Studio. If you prefer to use that tool, it's optional, it's not required. And your DBA team may want to stand up a different local SQL Server account that can do this reporting for you through SSMS if you choose to go that way. So why are we going to talk about reporting? So ultimately, the big points about reporting is we want to make the whole point of our tool is so that you can make informed decisions on how to create policies and procedures regarding sensitive data found in your environment. So the only way that you can do that is if you have a solid way of reporting and finding that information, because as many of you know, you'll have literally millions of results that get returned, and it's important you have a way to digest those results and make decisions based on that. So also, it's important to realize that report that you make is really your data inventory. So it can help with a lot of different processes and procedures that your infrastructure team or security team might be working through, and can help conversations that maybe aren't necessarily specific to Spirion, but specific to the data that's found using Spirion. Risk assessments would be another use case for this report. So when you're migrating data from one server to another, it's important to have a report to know kind of what data is on there and what to do with that data. Compliance and auditing purposes are also huge, so having this report can help save you during any type of breach incidents or any type of audits that are done, and we'll kind of walk through that and talk through that, but that's kind of just a high-level overview on why the reporting is so important. All right, so now we're going to switch over and I'm going to start the demonstration. Again, I would mention to all of those of you who maybe just joined a second ago that there is a handout in this meeting, so please feel free to grab that and follow along if you'd like to. So, all right, so you should be able to see my screen. And what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through how to set this up from scratch as if you've never done this before. So the very first thing that you need to do is open up an RDP session to your IIS server. So right now, here's my IIS server. This is where I installed the Spirion console. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create an advanced menu shortcut for the console administration tool. So here's the steps that I would follow to do that. I'm going to click the Windows button and I'm going to type in console administration tool, and it's the first thing that comes up. So instead of just clicking on this though, I'm going to right click this and I'm going to go open file location, and that's going to bring me over here. The next thing I'm going to do is right click it again, and I'm going to send it to the desktop to create a little shortcut there. This is something that I typically will do with all my implementations as I start off, is that we'll automatically set this up right at the very beginning. But if you haven't done this, you can do it at any time. There's no consequences of doing it later after you've been implemented. So once you have this shortcut right here, you're going to right click it one more time and go down to properties. And when the properties screen comes up, you're going to see target, and all you're going to do is hit the right arrow key so that it clears, and you're going to put a space and type advanced, like so. I'm going to hit apply and then OK. So as soon as that happens, now I have a shortcut. I know it doesn't look much different, but this is a shortcut that's going to have some additional functionality than your standard console administration tool. So I'm going to open up this tool, and this is what you typically see even if you hadn't created the shortcut. As a reminder, the console administration tool is where you set a lot of the settings related to service tasks and things like that, but it's also where we're going to be running this report out of. So what looks different about this in advanced mode is that you're going to have a lot more options available to you than you originally had. And the option that we're going to focus on today is run custom SQL. So everybody should get a copy of the query that I'm going to use today to do this report. That shouldn't be a problem, but if you need it, please reach out to our organizers and we can get you a copy of that. So the first thing I'm going to do is click Run Custom SQL. And right here, I'm just going to click Load. And what I'm going to be loading is a query that I've just saved to my IIS server. So I'll go ahead and open up the query so I can kind of show that to you really quick. And what this is a SQL query written by one of our database engineers, and is very helpful. We can customize this and kind of do different things with it, but this is a query that I've developed with probably about 30 different customers and having them all input different things that they'd like to see in it. So it's pretty comprehensive for a lot of different use cases and a lot of different types of compliance. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to load this in, just like so. The things that you might adjust on this is you might adjust right here. And what this allows you to do is basically cut certain slices at a time. So when you're reporting on it, but for the first time running it, we can just go ahead and hit start and not make any adjustments, and that should be fine. It's going to pull the last 100 days of search data by default. And in your reporting cheat sheet that we provided in the meeting invite, it has instructions on how to basically modify this query if you want to and cut different times. So I'm going to hit start, and it should take about a minute for this to kick out once I save it. The first thing I'm going to recommend is that you save the report as a name or something that's more meaningful to you than just results or something like that, because you'll tend to run a lot of reports and they can get kind of messy as you're running different things. So I'm going to name this just report and today's date. I'm going to hit save, and it's going to start. And like I said, it's going to take about a minute for it to kick out. And once it does, we're going to kind of dissect it and go through the process of getting this information from a kind of a raw state to something that's more massaged and allows us to make some decisions on what we're finding and be able to parse through it in different ways. So as I said before, the last time I ran it, it took about a minute. This report runs really fast. It is much faster than any of the reports that we create in our reporting engine. So it's a pretty decent report, and as I said before, it kind of works for a variety of different use cases. So now it's done. You can see it comes out in a zip file like this. What I'm going to do with the zip file is the first thing is I'm going to extract it. And what you'll see is that there's two different queries that pop out and also a copy of your SQL query. So if you need that, anything that happens, or if you're getting kind of weird errors, what I'd recommend is that you always use the load button. Don't try to just copy paste stuff into here, because the formatting does matter. So if you get a weird error, what I'd recommend is just hit the load button, grab the SQL file, and run it again. That should resolve pretty much anything else. So we're going to close this at this point. And the query that I'm going to focus on is query 2. We'll focus, if we have time, I'll cover what query 1 does, but for right now, we'll just kind of focus on this. So I'm going to open this with Excel. Now, I've loaded Microsoft Excel onto the IIS server just for this webinar. It's not recommended that you do that in a normal production environment, but just for the ease of presentation, we're going to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and open the query, and it's going to look something like this, which is kind of ugly to begin with. But we're going to start making it look a lot prettier and have a lot more information for us in just a second. So the very first step that I'm going to do is I'm going to basically handle the aggregations. So I'm going to select columns J, L, N, and P, and I'm going to do a quick find and select. So essentially, I'm going to find the nose and hit replace all. So I replace it with just a blank, and that way, when I pivot this table in a moment here, it ends up aggregating properly. If you don't do this step, then what it will do is it's just going to count all the times it sees text in those cells, and it will give you kind of a skewed number of what your data actually looks like. So doing this will make sure that the yeses still appear there, but the no's are gone, so they won't aggregate in a pivot. After I've done that, the next thing I'm going to do is save this whole thing as an Excel workbook. And the reason I'm going to do that is because Excel runs much faster when it's in XLSX format rather than CSV. So I'm going to say finished report. And this is going to be 8.18.2020 and hit save like so. Now what I'm going to do is click any cell that I see that has text, and I'm going to format as a table. So it's going to be like this, and we're going to go pick any color that I want, doesn't really matter. And I'm going to say my table does have headers, which is the default, and hit OK. So ultimately, right now, it's going to look a little bit better. But again, this is not something that is really that usable for me. It's just a raw output of all the information that was in the Spirion database, essentially, at that point. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to rename this sheet. I'm going to call this the master table. And then I'm going to pivot this. So this is kind of where we start to gain some intelligence. So I'm just going to click the Insert tab up at the top right here. And I'm going to go over to Pivot Table, this little Pivot Table button, making sure I've selected a cell that has text in it. And just go ahead and hit that button like so. And that's going to bring it over to this. So ultimately, this is where I can start building out my real reports. So here's some suggestions, and we outlined this in the documentation, but I would start off by putting endpoint name into rows and match location into values. So what this means right now, what I've just shown is all the endpoints that have been searched by Spirion and how many sensitive files or how many files were deemed sensitive is the count of match locations. One thing that I really like about this report is it shows you endpoints that have been searched, but we did not find sensitive data on them. So like this endpoint right here, for example, ends up being one that we searched it, but it did not have any sensitive data found when we did the search, which is nice. It's kind of hard to get that kind of report, but it can sometimes be just as significant as finding that there is sensitive information. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a timeline. So I'm going to click this little insert timeline button, and I'm going to insert a timeline based on the match location last access date. That's going to bring up a little slider like so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this over to years. So now I can get some more information. And if you're doing like retention policies or things like that, this is a really cool slider to start messing with to kind of get some information. So ultimately, the goal is to reduce my sensitive data footprint. And one thing I can do to do that is implement a retention policy. So if I wanted to analyze what how implementing a retention policy would shrink my sensitive data footprint, I can play with the slider. So for example, here's all the files that were found to be sensitive that haven't been opened by an end user in the last 2 years. So I can see that there's 557 files that were found that haven't been opened in over 2 years, and here's the machines that were found on. Maybe I want to know things like what kind of data types were found. So I can do that by inserting a couple more of these fields down here. So what you'll notice is that all the recognizers that you use to do your searches and whatnot with will be located down here. And all you have to do to bring that is just drag the recognizer or the any find definition or whatever you're using to the values field. So give me 1 second. I'm going to click that. And I'm going to pull this down to, so here's the amount of files that out of the ones that were sensitive that contained intellectual property. Here's ones that would constitute CCPA personal data. Here's how many contained bank account numbers, credit card numbers, and so forth. So I can kind of, mix and match depending on what I'm trying to report on and do that. So right here, you can kind of see there's an idea to do that. And again, I can use that slider or that filter that we created a second ago to ensure that I have kind of take a look and see how that data is affected by implementing a retention policy or getting rid of certain things that are older than they should be, and so forth. So I'm going to pivot this a couple other ways though. So I'm going to call this the device pivot right here. And then I'm going to go back to my master table and do it a couple more times. So the next thing that I'm going to do is create another pivot table, and I'll just hit. And this time I'm going to bring in tag name and throw that into rows. So this kind of depends on how well you've organized your tag groups for your endpoints in the Spirion console. But if you have done something like organize your endpoints into different departments, it'll allow you to report essentially on the different departments data. So I can see here's all the sensitive data by my tag groups, and all I'm doing is dragging match location over. And again, I can drop anything I want to in here. I can throw in things like here's how much of that data was intellectual property and so forth. I can insert another timeline. So again, we can just choose the last access date and so forth, like so. And I'll flip it over to years just so I can get a bigger look at some of the dates and things like that. So if I was to implement a retention policy, I can see how it's going to affect different departments if I have organized my tag groups by departments. So this is a tag pivot. The last thing that I'm going to pivot on is I'm going to pivot on the file owner. So I'm going to go right here, click insert, do another pivot table. And this time I'm going to throw file owner into rows. I had our DBA create a kind of modified query, which is different from the one that we'll give you. This one masks the user's name so that we're not exposing sensitive information, because one of the challenges of this webinar was the fact that I needed to use a console instance that was representative of a production environment, and ultimately the Spirion console that our company uses was the only one that would work for this. So expect it to look a little different on your sheet. So this is the file owner pivot. and so forth. So now I have 3 high-level reports that I can kind of look at the data different ways from 3 different angles, but we're going to do even more than that. So in a second here, I'm going to add my timeline back in here. And again, I'm going to go to access date.
Before you jump into that, I have a couple of outstanding questions, if I
Sure.
could just kind of
Yeah.
quickly ask those. The first is a very simple one. What version of Excel are you using here? Because some people are kind of wowed. They didn't realize that Pivot could do as much as it's doing.
Yeah, so this is the O365.
Okay.
That's what, yep. So
Okay.
downloaded
Great.
it.
So Office 365, go to Microsoft. They should pay us for that. And the second one was, does Spirion support full APIs for accessing this data from SQL queries?
Typically, okay, so that's a great question. I'm assuming that the question is aligned around automating this report. The API angle I haven't explored as much. What I have had some clients do with success is that they take the query and they go to their database administration team and they ask the DBAs to create a stored procedure for them that kicks this query out on a regular interval for them. So that's something that should be a pretty low-level task for a DBA. And if needed, if anybody has any questions after this webinar, you can reach out to me directly or to any of our organizers, and I can send you some materials that might assist your DBA team to do that. So, but I'm sure you could, in theory, do a lot of this automated. So,
Okay.
Was there any other questions?
No. Please go ahead. Sorry, I didn't.
Okay, cool.
Please.
No worries. So from here, I'm going to create some more reports. So essentially, this is good, but we're going to go a little further. So maybe I need a report on each one of these endpoints. So the nice thing about a pivot table is if you click any of these numbers right here in the B column, it's going to create a new report. So let's say I needed to make a report specific to this workstation, the AZPWS100. I just go ahead and click that, and you'll notice here's the report for that person. So I can just rename this AZ1PWS100 detailed report, and that might be good enough. We might do some other things, but I'll show that to you on a different ones, that one that has a little bit more data in it, so we can kind of pretend. So let's say one of this was a file server. Now, none of these are file servers, unfortunately, but let's pretend that this one is for a second. So we'll kind of drill into this one, and I'll walk you through how to do that. So we're going to pretend that this one's a file server. And what I'm going to do here is a couple things. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to insert 3 different columns, like so. And I'm going to rename the first column that I created as share folder for cleanup. Ultimately, this column is going to be a throwaway column here in a second. At this point, I don't want to think too hard, so I'm going to pull up my cheat sheet. The cheat sheet that we provided here for joining the webinar is going to be much cleaner and better looking than this, and it will walk you through each one of the steps that I'm covering right now. But for right now, I'm just going to use this kind of cheater cheat sheet, and I'm going to split the screen and bring this up so I can kind of look at it like so. So in the share folder for cleanup column that I just created, column E, I'm going to use this first equation, and I'm going to show you how to kind of work this equation to do the things that you need it to do. So I insert it in, it's going to populate throughout the entire thing. And what I'm going to first do is modify the large number here, the number 14. Ultimately, what I want to do, this is just a string manipulation, is I want to cut it. So notice if I put 3 in, what it's going to do is it's going to remove 3 letters from the left hand side under the match locations column. So essentially, it's just removing D:/. That's all this equation is doing. If I was to put in 10, it would remove 10 characters from that column. So I could cut it essentially wherever I want to. And the idea is that you want to cut it on the shares. So if you're searching a file server, what you want to be able to report on is how much sensitive data was in each share folder that was searched. So I want to adjust this number until it's cutting on a share. In this case, I'm going to cut it on 3. And then I'm gonna go over to column D and I'm gonna insert this equation. This thing needs no, there's absolutely no manipulation or anything I need to do with this. I just need to copy, paste this equation right here, like so. And what it's gonna do is it's gonna reference that and pull the share name out and delete everything after the slash. So essentially what this column is gonna be is my share directory. The last thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a clickable link. So this is really cool. This allows you to create a link so that somebody that's viewing this report can essentially click the link that's in the report. And if they have permissions to the file, it'll open up that file for them, even if it's across the network. So the key comment there, though, is that if you have permissions. If I don't have permissions, this won't work for me, which is kind of a good thing too, because then you're not exposing sensitive information to somebody who shouldn't have privileges to see that information. So now I'm going to take this whole thing and I'm going to pivot it again to give you an idea of what the shares look like. So ultimately, I'm going to pivot this table and we're going to go, I'll go ahead and expand this because I won't be using anything else there. And at this point, instead of throwing tag name or endpoint name or file owner in, I'm going to find the new column that I created, which is share directory, throw that into the rows. So now I get to see here's all the different directories that were searched from the root level. And I can type match location in there again and the same kind of thing. So I can bring in that timeline and we can throw it in on access date. And again, kind of slice the data along and see how much of this data hasn't been opened in the last month, the last year, and so forth within that share. So if you wanted to, I could continue to drill in on this data. We could still go back to here. I could drill into another one of the share directories. So the important part would be that this would be named, let's see. So we've got this one. I gotta make sure I keep on my naming. So this is for RM1-P-WS025. This is the detailed report. And then this is the share pivot. So I'll probably rename this one RM1-P-WS025. And then I'll just call this the share pivot. And if I wanted to, we could say, all right, we're gonna go look at the E drive and continue this again so that we could look further into the E drive and see. So again, all I'm gonna do is insert my equation right here. I'm gonna paste it in the share directory for cleanup, like so. So we'll go, oops, let me grab that one more time. And right here, I'm just gonna go like this. And let's say I wanted to get, let's see, we want to probably clean up a little bit further in. So 14 would get us to I, so 14, 15, 16, let's say about 20. We'll see where that gets us. So documents, perfect. So that's perfect. Now I'm another level in. And again, it's just a matter of taking these equations and copying and pasting them right into the report. So I'll delete that, throw that in there, hit enter. And now I'm just gonna double click that so that the equation goes all the way down. Oh, actually I threw that in the wrong spot. Give me one sec. I put that in our clickable link section. So see. All right, we'll undo all that, throw it in the right spot. There we go. And then the last part is I'll throw that clickable link back in so that if somebody wants to review it, they can. And right here, throwing in my hyperlink location so that I'm pulling in that correctly. And if I want it to populate all the way through, I don't have permissions to view that file, so it's going to try to access that, and then it'll tell me that I can't. Give me 1 second. is trying to access the file across the network, and I don't have the permissions to view that file. So give me one sec. All right, cannot open up the specified file. There we go, there's my clickable link. And then we can pivot this again. So this would be focused on the E drive within Spirion. We want to maybe go to the documents part of this. So let me throw that one more time right here. I must have thrown the other one in the wrong spot. So one sec, Control A, delete. And we'll change that back to 20. That's perfect. So this is on the E drive, and we'll pivot this. So this is the E drive detailed. And then we'll pivot it again one more time so you can see it, so that we're looking another step in. So again, I would just show my share directory, and it looks like there was only one directory there underneath the share, and so it won't look much different. But if you did have multiple layers deep, you can kind of report that way, different things like that. So here's the pivot on the E drive, which is not too impressive. All right, so let's go do some other things here to kind of take a look at. So we'll go back to our main device report. Sometimes, depending on how you put the search in, you can get away with using a less complicated equation to create the clickable link, which could be hyperlink is just equal to the match location column. If you're searching workstations, this one will be the one that you'll use. Again, that's kind of notated in the documentation and whatnot for you. So feel free to take a look at it. Here's some other ideas on how to look at this report. So one of the most important aspects of the report is being able to show how many sensitive files you've taken care of, because that's how you're going to show the value that you've created using Spirion. So I want to be able to show, here's how many files no longer exist, here's how many files have been quarantined, and here's how many files have been shredded. So I can easily throw that here. Now, obviously, I haven't shredded a lot of documents, but here's the amount of documents that I've quarantined. Here's the amount of files that no longer exist. And ultimately, at the bottom, you're going to see an aggregation of those numbers so that you can prove, hey, these files no longer exist, essentially, and things like that. So different things that you can look at and do based on that is really nice. Some other things that you might look at doing as you're digesting this report or going through it are, here, let me remove some things because it's getting a little messy right here. So we're going to remove that, and we'll remove that field for right now. So some other things that you will do is typically you're going to hand this over to leadership. You might also hand it over to like a data governance team or somebody who's really working with the data to kind of validate results and things like that for you. So they might start on something like the master table, or they might start like here on the device pivot, and let's say they're analyzing results. Well, we'll start on the master table. So what I usually tell people who are the first time when I'm training them on this report to do is go for the low-hanging fruit. So the easiest thing that you can do if you want to kind of get an idea of what to attack first is go to the match location access date column on your master table and simply sort it from oldest to newest. And that'll bring up, here's all the files that haven't been accessed in a super long time that people aren't touching. So if they're not touching the files, like we can all usually agree that, you know, people need sensitive information to do their jobs. But if you haven't opened that sensitive information for 10 years, maybe you don't need it on your in that location anymore. Maybe we can put it in a safer spot into an archive location or something like that. So another thing that I kind of like to do as a test, and I've not yet had a single client that I've worked with where we've not been able to do this, is go to the match locations column and go down here, and you're going to use text filter. So for text filter, this can be really interesting. You can say contains W2 or contains, let's see, contains, then we're going to put W2 like so, and hit OK. Here's how many W2s exist that we found on our searches. And if you just look at the names of the files, it doesn't take a genius to figure out, hey, this is somebody's real W2. And again, this is something that you can pivot out and show easily to somebody in a report and say, hey, yeah, these are true positives. They're living here. And here's the thing is that we've sorted the list already on oldest to newest. So these look like maybe somebody's W-2 as they were doing their taxes from last year, and unfortunately they just left it on their machine. So maybe we can make a decision to clean that up for them. Other things you can do are adding in different filter criteria. So if you only want to focus on maybe one of the recognizers that you're using, just find the recognizer. So this one was the intellectual property sensitive data definition one, and maybe I only care about that. So here's all the data that's just that. So I'm going to go ahead and remove my text filter. And this is all the data that relates to specifically just the intellectual property recognizer that I created. And the same thing is true for any of these. What I like about Excel is the fact that I can create notes columns and things like that. So as I'm validating this data, if I gave this over to somebody in data governance, I might make a notes column and say, hey, what I want you to do is I really want you to kind of focus on maybe the first 10 or 100 results, review them for me and let me know, are there false positives here? Is this true PII? Did we label it correctly? Is this the right recognizer that it belongs in, and so forth? And they can just kind of fill it out on their own and then maybe give it back to me so I can go quickly look through it and say, all right, I know that I have false positives coming up based on the searches in the finance folder or things like that. So different ideas that you can kind of implement and work with to create the report. And then when you're finally done with that, you can obviously save it as a file. And the nice part is you aren't really, this is a sensitive file for sure because it contains the directions to all the sensitive data in your environment. But one thing that I really appreciate about this report is that it doesn't actually show any of the PII elements that are in the files themselves. So I'm not, if you notice, there's nobody's social security number in this report. I don't list any credit card numbers in this report or anything like that. So it does kind of mitigate some risk in regards to that. And remember, the clickable links only work if the user who's viewing the report has the permissions to actually grab that file. Of course, they have to be on the network and whatnot to make that work. But other things that you can do here is maybe you're doing a PowerPoint presentation kind of on the Spirion project, and you can work with things called pivot charts. So if I go to the Analyze tab under Pivot Table Tools, I can easily start tossing in visualizations to give, maybe my leadership a higher level view if they prefer, a visualization on this. And the nice thing about a pivot table, again, is the fact that everything's pretty dynamic. So if I only want to highlight the files that have been haven't been touched in the last year or so, I can go like this and notice my graph, my display automatically updates dynamically for me. So I can kind of look at it, slice it different ways and say, hey, yeah, this is where we really need to focus our remediation efforts, is because ultimately, we want to get rid of these 149 files. Here's the workstations we're going to have to go to do that. And here's the type of information that's in them. We can grab in all of the recognizers we used, and we can say, well, 43 of the 78 files on this device ended up being an intellectual property. Maybe we want to exempt intellectual property from our scope because we don't really want to exclude any of that. So we might say, hey, it needs to be blank. So I only want to see it where it's blank. So notice how this number went down. So now it's only 35 files that I care about there. It looks like the other files on there were under one of these other buckets. So again, kind of just a different way to parse through this data and look at it. And notice how my pivot chart, as I'm adding in these other things, are now labeling what each one of these are. So it's showing me, hey, here's how much of this information is this. Here's how much information is intellectual property, and so forth and so forth. So you could take this slide, take a quick screenshot of it, throw it into a PowerPoint presentation, and show at the end of the quarter, hey, here, ultimately, this is what I've done. The real magic comes in when you go to make your remediation decisions, because for our deployment of Spirion, we only search our workstations. Most everything else is in the cloud in other secure locations. So for majority of clients that I work with, these numbers typically have a couple more zeros behind them. And if you make a decision to remediate 10,000 files, so we're going to go back here and kind of clean up some of this so we can kind of look at this from a higher level view. So we're going to kind of do a hypothetical scenario here. And let's say that we wanted to maybe reduce, we knew we were just looking at, I'm going to delete that, so it's kind of out of my way. And I'm going to focus on intellectual information. So give me one sec. So let's say as a security group, we decided, hey, we're going to go after intellectual property because we don't think it should be on workstations, period. If I implement that as a decision, ultimately the cost of if this data was lost in a data breach, I'd have to figure that out. But there's some great reports that you can look at. One of them is a study from IBM from 2019 that says the cost of a data breach, and you can find that report online. If you need a copy of it, feel free to email us and we can send you a copy of it. But ultimately, let's say I wanted to remediate these 3,599 files. In the IBM 2019 cost of a data breach report, the average cost of a record that's breached is about $150. So I can say, ultimately, if I was successful in remediating all these files, how much money did I just save my organization in risk mitigation? Well, it looks like I saved my company about $500,000 in risk by remediating that data, moving it, quarantining it, shredding it, whatever I feel needs to be done with it. If it's medical files, the cost is significantly higher. So just different ideas to kind of play around with as you're doing this. Hopefully that kind of makes sense for you. This is also great for PCI compliance. So if you want to use this information to take machines out of scope or certain locations, this would be great for a PCI compliance audit. So you could basically show different things like, here's machines that we did not find credit cards on when we searched for them. So it's fair to say that maybe these machines, of course, you need to talk to your legal team about doing this, but you could say, you know, when we ran the search on these devices, there was no credit cards. So it's high likelihood that they're not using these machines to process credit card information. So you might be able to take those out of scope and, you know, increase the efficiency of your PCI compliance. If I am doing like CCPA stuff, I might want to know, hey, if I care about like residency of the data or where the data is living, you could pull out different countries, sensitive information and stuff based on devices. And if you knew where the mappings are there, you can kind of do different things with that as well. So this is kind of the high level idea of how to create that report. And really all I'm doing is just manipulating this through a pivot table and saving it as a report. So we do have some more time, so I'm going to go through what to do with query one and why query one is in that query that kind of pops out. So
before you do, I have a couple of direct questions for you.
great.
The first one is a very specific question. So they ask if they created a sensitive data definition with a dictionary that contains employee names, for example, after they export the report, will they be able to sort location and data types by employee name from that dictionary?
Great question. The answer is no on that.
Okay.
Because you would consider that the employee name itself is sensitive. Just like if it was a list of social security numbers, it's not going to show you matches. And that is a caveat with this report, is that it's not going to show you any type of matches. However, remember, keep in mind that it does allow you to click the link. So if you wanted to see whose information was in there, you could click the link, open up the real document and see it. So
okay,
you would be able to tell it that way. But was not exposed.
Yeah. And then the other question is, there's a couple of people saying this is really great. Is there any plan to build this into Sensitive Data Manager, this kind of reporting?
I hope so. It's something that I've definitely discussed with our product team. It's something that I know is on the radar for a lot of our developers. As to a timeline or a roadmap to delivery, I'm not the right person to ask for that. So unfortunately, I can't provide you that information.
Okay. I'm going to step up and ask that everybody take a look at what's coming in Data Privacy Manager, because some of this is definitely going to be possibly available there as well. So keep that in mind, and then I'll stop hawking and turn it right back over to you, Kyle.
Oh, that's okay. Great. And continue to ask questions. If you have questions, I'm more than happy to stop and answer them for you. So I'm sure other people have questions if you have that question. So please don't hesitate to ask.
Yeah, people seem really interested in this. So
Cool.
whatever else you have with the last few minutes, I'm sure that they'd like. I'll interrupt if there's a question.
Okay. So what, again, kind of like what I had explained before was that what I like about this report is it shows the machines that have been searched, even if there isn't sensitive data found on those machines. That's critical. But another component that I had one client ask me about, so that's why we built out the other query that comes out of this is, well, I need a report that shows me all the machines that haven't been searched in that period of time. And that's what query one is. So I'll show you that really quick. Query one is not as pretty to look at. So I'll kind of show you what to expect here. But this is query one. And really query one is meant to be more of a troubleshooting report. So things like tag names, maybe not as important, but these are the list of all the devices that haven't been searched by default in the last 100 days. So ultimately, it'll tell you the policy state of that device, the last time that the last activity state. So it looks like these machines acknowledged the task but never searched. And then it will also tell you the last time that the machine checked into the console, which can be very telling as to why they hasn't been searched. If it's never checked into the console, then it's probably a VPN issue or something like that. The machine's off the network or been decommissioned or so forth. And it will also tell you the last recorded time that that machine was recorded to have done a search. All this should be under like over 100 days ultimately, because we sliced the last 100 days on the search. So right here, you know, these machines haven't been searched for a very long time. I might need to use this sheet to say, okay, if something happened there, hopefully I ran a report on this date or prior to this date, so I do have what was found on that device, you know, in a different report. So again, the idea would be is that you keep all these reports in a central repository that has very strong access control around it, so that the people that need access to it can easily get the information, but that also not everybody's able to get it. So hopefully that answers, makes sense to everyone on the call, what to use this report for. It's mainly for troubleshooting and realizing, hey, this is our blind spot right now. I'll kind of demonstrate, since we have a little bit more time, unless anybody has any questions, kind of different ways to modify the query, because it's something that I didn't know if we would have enough time to do or not. So some of you may have really large databases, and there is a kind of a size limitation, which is why we built in parameters for you to be able to chop this data directly in the query. So I'm going to kind of rerun the console administration tool and load up the query again and then kind of modify it. So we'll go here, run custom SQL again, and I'll load that query like so. And what I might do is I might start messing with the start date time. So right here, I can either put in year, month, day. So I could do something like 2020. I could put in, you know, maybe I only want to pull from March or from August, sorry. And I might want to just pull from the first. So 01. That would work. So this would basically show me all the search results from August and all the machines that have been searched since August and all the results that came in. So if I do this, hit start, again, it will ask me for something, and I should have named it something more meaningful than just the default name. But again, it's going to basically go through all that data and just grab the last 18 days worth of information for me. So that can be important. You might have to adjust that parameter. The other thing you can do is you can mess with the 100. So if you just want to not worry about the date, but you just want to say, right now we have it set to pull the last 100 days worth of data. You can change that to maybe pull the last 1,000 days worth of data if you wanted to report from the beginning of time. The report might be gigantic at that point, so you might not do that. But you could also pull it from, maybe the last quarter or different things like that. The whole point is that once you have pulled this report, you can basically purge the information from the database, because the Spirion database wasn't ever meant to be a duplication of all the sensitive information in your environment. That's really not the goal of the Spirion database. So I've met some legacy clients who want to hold all the sensitive information they found in the Spirion database, and I tell them, let's run the report, let's get all that information out, and then let's clear the database so that our performance improves and that search imports come in faster, and I'm not waiting for hours on my results screen and things like that. So just different ideas. And if you are running this report on a monthly basis, then you can obviously purge data on a monthly basis after you've run the report. So you can kind of set up your schedules and things like that accordingly. The other thing is you can, as we're waiting for this, it's taking a little longer, but you can also modify the end date right here. So if you wanted to pull, 2 weeks ago, the search that you ran, you could change from current timestamp to the date that you wanted to pull to. By default, it's setting to pull to the present. So all data from this date to that date. There's a little bit of beta functionality for this query that we've been playing with, which is an exclude tag name. So that's the last thing that you might play around with. So you can put a name of the tag of endpoints that you want to exclude, so you're only reporting on certain sections. Again, this would require you to create different tag groups and organize your endpoints into those tags. But once you had done so, the idea would be that you could toss in right in between the quotation marks a tag name, and you could put in workstations. I don't want to report on workstations, I only want to report on file servers. Click start, and it would basically pull all the information from the tags that aren't workstations, essentially. So those are the different ways to kind of modify the query. But I have a lot of clients who don't ever touch the SQL query. They just kind of run it as it is, and it works great like that. So don't feel like you have to get creative with this or anything like that. It can just be left as current score timestamp and minus 100 if you want to, or 1,000 or whatever you feel is applicable for your instance of Spirion. So that's that. So hopefully you guys find this information to be valuable, and hopefully it helps you make better, more informed decisions on your sensitive data remediation plans and things like that. We have one last slide to show you, and then we'll kind of leave it open for the last 5 minutes for any other questions that people have. But at this point, Sandra, I guess I'll turn it back over to you, and you guys kind of wrap up.
I will turn it over to Marissa, actually.
Oh, Marissa.
Just wanted to say thank you to everyone who joined us today. Wanted to quickly remind you that you can download the handout, or you can visit us online at the customer portal for any additional resources. And we will be sending out a follow-up email. And if you'll notice the screen, we have some upcoming dates for future tips and tricks webinars hosted by the all-knowing Kyle. And again, thank you so much.